Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. In this video I'm going to be reviewing Anbernic's latest device, their RG35XX H. This is pretty much a follow-up that is using pretty much the same components that are on the other review unit that I got for the Anbernic RG35XX+. This is just a more Game Boy-like vertical form factor, and this has been same parts redone in a candy bar slate form factor. Effectively, all of the things that I've said about the 35XX+ review that I said before carry over to this one. The only thing is that I kind of prefer the horizontal candy bar style a little bit more, even though once again we have these inline shoulder buttons. We'll go more into detail later on in this video. However, I want to quickly touch base on the important parts of the specs on this particular device. The big part here is this very nice 3.5-inch 640 by 480 IPS display. This is a sensational display, especially within its price bracket. Additionally, the chip that's on here, the Allwinner H700 chip, is actually really good for the Linux OS that is on this particular system. The big part there are the quad-core Cortex A53s. Those CPUs are going to give us just enough oomph to actually emulate games up to Dreamcast and a whole slew of PS1. Now, you can play a number of PSP titles on this. However, I really wouldn't recommend it. Even though we can play a number of PSP games on this device, the aspect ratio is not the best for PSP games. Additionally, the type of horsepower that we have on this device isn't enough to run most PSP games adequately. What that means to you is that we're going to top out with PSP emulation, Dreamcast emulation, and PlayStation 1 emulation. Those are the top levels of systems that are going to be fully playable on this device. The one thing that may surprise you is that Dreamcast games run surprisingly well on this device. This is a type of game, especially with its 4x3, 640 by 480 aspect ratio, is going to play a lot of older home console retro games that on this particular device really well, especially when you consider that it's going to be between $70 and $75 shipped to you in various regions. The price and the performance on what's offered here is really good. Specifically, also the RG35XX+, the vertical unit as well, which I've reviewed a few weeks ago, is also in the same bracket, so it's really just the different form factor that we have here. Now, I have had this device for a number of days now, and I wanted to have a number of days so that I could run the longer battery test that I'm normally used to doing. Once again, I am running Crash Bandicoot 3, and I have him running in a circle so that I have some horsepower that is being driven, so that there's a dynamic scene that is being generated, but also we're looking at a little bit over 8 hours of battery life in PS1 games. So this clearly falls in line with the advertisement that Anbernic says that you're going to get up to 8 hours of battery life, and indeed I got a little bit over 8 hours of battery life in PS1 emulation, which is up along the topper end of the emulation that you're going to be running on this device. So it's great to see that we are actually getting 8 hours of battery life on such a small device. Before we get into the build quality part of this review, I did want to remark on the D-pad as well as the shoulder buttons. The D-pad on this device is actually really good. Maybe it's just the form factor, maybe it's just how I'm holding the device. I'm able to finesse the D-pad far better on this particular form factor than I am on the RG35XX+, the Game Boy form factor. So take that with a grain of salt. It could just be me and how I'm holding the device, but I actually appreciate how using the D-pad on this device more than on the vertical form factor. The other thing I want to briefly mention is the thing that I often complain about on Anbernic devices is their use of inline shoulder buttons. For the life of me, I just really don't like these. I really wish that Anbernic would just use stack shoulder buttons. I know that it would change the dimensions of it and affect the pocketability of it. However, I am often pressing the wrong button, especially when I'm playing different games when I need to press R1 or R2. I often get those mixed up just because of how they are. My brain, for whatever reason, just frazzles out when it's far easier and doesn't require any thought from me if they were stacked. So that's the only two things that I wanted to briefly talk about here before getting into the build quality review. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. For the build quality part of this video, let's start off with going on what's on the device itself. So on the left-hand side, we have our digital plus and minus volume. We have our downward firing stereo speakers, accompanying it with our dual micro SD card slots. You're only going to have the one that it definitely comes with unless you pay for the second one, which has additional games that Anbernic sells, or you can actually use Garlic OS 2 to actually go to a second custom ROM that is being developed right now so that you have the option of dual booting between what Anbernic provides and what Black Seraph is providing. On the right-hand side, we have our reset button as well as our power button. Up here is our function button, and typically this is what you're going to use to get out of a game. So you're going to press this to either bring up RetroArch or bring up the in-game menu, we have our power charging slot, our on-the-go USB port. This is where you're going to be plugging in USB to like USB-A. So if you want to connect any external peripherals, this is going to be your mini HDMI port. If you want to go HDMI out, then we have a 3.5mm audio jack. That's it for what's on the side of the device. On the back, we have our traditional Anbernic grips here. Now, this isn't so much for your hands to hold. It's more for the device not to slip on a table. As you can see, we can actually take a look at the vertical version of this, which doesn't have any rubber grips, and you can see it just slides around. So really, that's more or less what this is for, is just grip and traction for keeping it in place. Otherwise, it's not really all that big of a deal for where you're holding the device. Taking a brief comparison to the sister device, so the original device that came out was the 35XX Plus, and then we have the 35XX Plus H, and this is just basically the same guts and everything else that was on this particular model, except in a horizontal candy bar style form factor. So it's really up to you on what you're looking to get out of it. Performance-wise and price-wise, what you're getting out of these devices is pretty good, considering that they're both around $65, around $75 shipped, depending on where you are on average. We can see that it's basically, you're going to be up to a subjective choice on what you're looking to get out of these devices. If you want something that's far more compact and you don't really care about something that's going to be fitting in your pocket, the original 35XX is probably going to be what you're going to be looking after. However, if there's going to be something that you really want to be putting in your pocket, the 35XX Plus H is going to be definitely something that you're going to want, because not having this hump here is a pretty big difference, and just being a bit taller really isn't that big of a deal when you're pocketing the device. So that's it from a size comparison to the original device. We'll put that on the side. With the comparison out of the way, let's get into a brief tour of the stock OS. Now, this is a very bare bones system. We're going to go through just some of the features that you get out of this. We can go in the settings. You can take a look at the battery, and it's just going to give you the voltage. Once it hits about 3.7, that's the nominal voltage. That's when you're going to be pretty much at the lowest battery possible. There are going to be additional ROMs that are available. Black Seraph is currently working on Garlic OS 2, and you can actually dual boot between both of those if you were looking forward to that. We have backlight brightness, we have IO test, and this is where you can test your buttons, just to make sure that all of them are working. Start and select will get you out of that. Date and time, language settings if you need to change that. RetroArch settings, this is where you're going to go to if you wanted to get to RetroArch settings outside of being in a game. We'll touch on that in just a moment, but you can see that you can go ahead and change any of the settings that you want here. Inside network settings, this is going to be where you're going to want to do all of your connectivity. So you can set up Bluetooth, you can set up Wi-Fi. You can see my Wi-Fi symbol is right there with a little exclamation point. I have it enabled, but I haven't actually connected anything. This is what you're going to want, especially if you want to do NetPlay, but also if you want to do retro achievements. And then also Moonlight streaming. This is what you're going to do if you want to do game streaming to this particular device. And then you have icon settings, and this is where you can just basically change the icons on the simple OS to whatever you want. Likewise, the background settings, this is just to theme the console however you want. I'll go ahead and do background image 1. Button sound on or off, so I can do off. And now the button sounds are off. For buttons custom, this is where you're going to go if you want to configure any of the buttons on the device itself, or if you want to change any other external Bluetooth controller that is on the device connected via Bluetooth. So that's what you can do there. For clearing records, this is basically just to wipe out whatever RetroArch settings you have. For firmware version, this shows you what I'm on. I'm on the December 19th of 2023, and work like status during sleep, so this is to illuminate the LED here, and reboot and shut down. And that's pretty much all of the settings on the device. This is where things can get a little bit confusing, and truthfully, I don't even use the game room side of this particular stock OS. I just go straight into RA game. RA game means RetroArch, meaning you're launching all of these emulators using the RetroArch cores to play them. And for what it's worth, most all of the emulators that they have in here run just perfectly fine. So everything that comes in this device that you're looking at will run most everything that you need to well enough. What's nice is they're organized in a way where you can see the ceiling of what is playable on this device. So there is PSP on here, but again, like I've already talked about, PSP games are going to be not ideal because you're running at a smaller aspect ratio, and there are some games that won't even actually run all that well across every PSP game. For Dreamcast, it's actually surprising that most games that I played on Dreamcast run perfectly fine. So most all Dreamcast games are going to run really well here. As well as PlayStation 1. PlayStation 1 games run really well here. You have CPS 1, CPS 2, CPS 3, Neo Geo. All these games run really well. Pico 8, this is really cool that they've included the functionality here, so you can just quickly drop in any Pico game that you want. The vertical arcade part here is a bit weird, because when you go into vertical arcade, all of these are not set up vertically. They're actually set up horizontally. You need to go all the way down to apps, and then say vertical arcade rotation on, it's off by default. So you need to turn it on so that it plays like this, and then everything is mapped correctly. I don't know why that would be off by default. There's also ports that you have available to you. So you have like Quake that you can play. If you ever wanted to play any other type of Linux game, you can just slap the port on there if it's been built for it, and then play those games as well. With regards to emulation, there is a lot that is fully playable on this device, and for the price and what you get out of it, it's actually really compelling. There's also a lot of other features that Anbernic has done here with like Open Beats of Rage as well as Pico 8. All of these are just everything that they've assembled just so you can quickly get up and running on all these different ways to play, and it's a nice way to get into something very quickly and very inexpensively. So that's my review on Anbernic's latest device, their Anbernic RG35XX H. It's a mouthful, and it's just a rebrand of a device that they've already came out with, so they're just repurposing it into a different form factor. If the vertical form factor wasn't something that you liked and you want something that was a lot more pocketable, this is definitely going to be what you want, especially when you're looking at $70, $75. Value-wise, this is a very good buy. However, if you already bought the RG35XX Plus and are already liking it, this isn't going to do anything new for you. So this is just repackaged and put into a different form factor. That is it for me, guys. I hope this was informative. As always, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.